Thank you.
Hi, everyone. My name is Spencer Burchett. I'm from ATCO Gas and Pipelines, so we're based out of Alberta. We're a utility there, but ATCO does a number of things. What we're going to present on today is just the hydrogen work that the utility is doing, so specifically what ATCO is doing. Slide here. Okay, so I'll briefly kind of talk about ATCO because I know we're not necessarily a household name outside of Alberta. We'll go into sort of the what is hydrogen. Obviously everyone here's taking a chemistry class. I know you guys are all graduate students, so you know probably more about history and stuff than myself, but just sort of general properties, why we care about it, and what we have to consider when we design with hydrogen. The whys of hydrogen, so why ATCO is pursuing this, why utilities in general are doing this, why it's an interest for the industry, and then we'll start talking about a lot of our projects that we're working on currently, some of the challenges we've had and a lot of the work that's gone into that, what it looks like moving forward, progressing hydrogen utilities and generally moving forward. A bit of a sort of hot topic in the last 5 years. And then we'll have some room for questions at the end. I'm happy to take questions during the presentation as well, so feel free to stick your hand if you have questions. And I don't know how questions for the audience work, but you moderate that. In any case, I'm sure there'll be more time at the end if that's the easiest way to do it.
Maybe the online persons can put it in the chat and I will check. Yeah, okay.
Okay, so who is ATCO? ATCO is a fairly large company. We do a lot of different things. As I said, I work for ATCO Gas and Pipelines, which is a subsection of ATCO, so that's part of the business that does natural gas transportation and distribution. We also own an electric company, so that does the same work on the utility side for electricity. We also do modular buildings. So if any of you guys have seen the on construction sites, will have those big sort of C-can looking things that are gray with a big yellow stripe on the top. That's actually how ATCO started. ATCO stands for Alberta Trailer Company.
Is that Slovakia? Croatia?
You know what? I don't know. My geography is terrible. But maybe. So I'm the wrong person to ask about that for sure.
But it's definitely East Europe, yeah. Right? Is it about hydrogen or?
I think that's largely the storage and like infrastructure sort of side of the business. So not our hydrogen.
Okay.
That would all be concentrated in Alberta and Australia. We also own a couple of ports. I know nothing about those, so if you have questions.
So like trailers, you mean, right? Like ATCO trailers?
Yeah, like the trailers. We also do some modular buildings and stuff as well. But I think largely the stuff
Anytime you see a construction trailer or a trailer that's on the side, look at it, you'll see it almost all the time from ATCO.
Yeah. It's fun, kind of like whenever I travel, you'll wander into some occasions. So keep it home. So, as I said, I work for ATCO Gas and Pipelines, so we're Alberta's largest natural gas distribution company. We handle both the transmission and distribution side. So the transmission side is high pressure pipelines that takes the natural gas from your suppliers into the cities, and then the distribution side is the stuff that goes into your houses, homes, businesses, all that kind of stuff. We serve about 1.3 million customers, so that's 1.3 million endpoints, houses, businesses, not individuals, in about 300 communities. About 50,000 kilometers of pipelines in Alberta, 41,000 kilometers of which are distributions, low pressure stuff, and about 800 gigawatt hours of salt cavern storage. So, has everybody heard of salt cavern storage before? Do you know what that is? No. So essentially, they have these large geological deposits underground that are essentially just salt. They pump water down into them. They're hundreds of meters below the ground. And they suck that brine back up, and they've created a huge cavern. And they're able to store really, really high pressure gas underground. So we have 5 sites there that we store natural gas in over the years. So we build up those reservoirs during the summer months when we're not using as much gas. And then we draw those down during the winter when it gets really cold. We're heating our homes more. So just for reference on scale there, the largest battery electric storage. Oh, sure. Question?
So when you're talking about what container do you store?
So that's like the cavern itself. You have like a geological formation. You've removed a portion of that geological formation that's that salt, and essentially that big cavern that's formed is what holds the gas. So you're essentially creating like your own gas reservoir underground. It's not like a mine. You essentially like drill a borehole into the ground, and it's very, very deep. So yeah, it's not like a what's the right term? Be like
Shaft.
Yeah, it'd be like a shaft. It wouldn't be like an open mine or anything like that.
So in Germany, they discussed that a lot, to use it as like for hydrogen storage, for renewable energy, but they never came to it for some reason. And the other thing is that they actually used one salt storage for nuclear waste, and that has leaked now, so they have to remove everything. So I wonder about the risks of leakage.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, I think they're pretty well studied for natural gas. I think there's still a lot of ongoing work to determine their feasibility for different molecules. So that I couldn't tell you a ton about, but we've been using these salt caverns for decades.
Where are most of them?
That I mean, I think there's a good portion kind of in northeast Alberta, but there's kind of anywhere with the big geological formations. I think there's one near Viking. Did I mention? But yeah, I think there's 5. There might be 6. Anyways, so I guess just for reference on the scale of that energy storage, the largest battery project in the world, so a couple years ago in California, was about 3.3 gigawatt hours. So, when we're looking at heating, especially in Canada, obviously it's important to sort of consider, the energy requirements and sort of what we're able to do from an energy density perspective when we're storing energy. And sort of the last piece for ATCO here are ESG targets, and this kind of feeds into the reason why ATCO is pursuing hydrogen as a whole, and a lot of companies, their rationale behind pursuing it. So we're looking to reduce obviously our own emissions by about 30%, owning, developing, or managing over 1 gigawatt of renewable energy, and then the big one for our hydrogen project is reducing our customers' GHG emissions by 2 million tons, and that's through clean fuels, energy efficiency, all that kind of stuff. And that's a really big part for us because it's easy to ask homeowners like, hey, upgrade your efficiency for walls, get new appliances, but they're still burning the fuel that comes from us. So it's a big part that we can play in getting to that. So what is hydrogen? Generally speaking, I just wanted to show some comparisons between the gas we use today and then hydrogen. So methane makes up about 85 to 95% of natural gas, which is what's predominantly used to heat homes in Canada. So similar to methane, hydrogen is colorless, odorless, flammable. It can be explosive, and then it's non-corrosive and non-toxic. So similar in a lot of ways there. In terms of combustion, this won't be anything new to you guys, but again, the combustion process, whenever you have a hydrocarbon, you end up with a CO2 and some water vapor out the other side, along with the energy you're looking for, and obviously the benefit of hydrogen. You don't have that carbon mixed in there, so there's no CO2 as a byproduct. We're looking at carbon emissions. That's obviously sort of the main factor when we're looking at doing hydrogen.
So water is also a big greenhouse gas, right? So if the hydrogen is made from water, then that doesn't matter because it's circling. But if it's made from fossil fuels, it does matter.
Yeah, I guess so.
Yeah.
I'm not sure what it wouldn't be, I guess, any different than burning natural gas normally, right?
You're still generating water.
Yeah, you're still generating.
Yeah, you're still
water.
yeah.
So yeah, I'm not certain to what extent.
Yeah, so it would be the same.
And you might get a little bit of larger volume because you have to burn more volume of hydrogen. But again, if you're making it from methane.
Right.
Digging into the sort of the more quantitative properties of hydrogen and comparing it to natural gas. From a density perspective, it is a lot lighter, which is a benefit in a lot of ways when we're talking about safety. It's a lot more buoyant. It diffuses a lot faster, so if you have a leak, you're less likely to have that gas build up in a certain area where it could be flammable. On the other side of things, the flammability limit for hydrogen are a lot broader than methane. So for methane, you're looking at about 5 to 15% in air, where you can actually ignite a mixture. Outside of that, it's either too lean or too rich. Hydrogen's a lot broader, so between 4 and 75% in air is ignitable, and your ignition energy is often a lot lower. So these ignition energies shown are stoichiometric combinations, but again, you're about 10 times know that for natural gas, your stoichiometric mixture is around 8 to 10%, I believe, which is a lot easier to form when you have a leak. For hydrogen, it's about 30% in air, which for most residential uses is very difficult to form in your home with sort of the average leak tightness of your home. So something good to keep in mind in any case when we're just designing these systems. Flame velocity is also an important factor, especially when we're looking at appliance. When you're looking at converting appliances over, so when they're designing those appliances, the nozzles are built in such a way that they're balancing the flow of fuel with the flame of the velocity of the flame. So if your velocity of your flame is too much higher, your nozzle will have to be adjusted to make sure it doesn't either flash back into the appliance and cause the nozzle to be damaged, or lift off and cause it to be unignited essentially, and then you just have building gas without a flame.
Can I ask a question about this? So we had a professor who's long retired now, 30 years ago. He used to argue that hydrogen would never be used as a fuel because of the flame velocity issue, and that it was very difficult to control and unsafe, not just for that perspective. You look at the numbers, I mean,
That's almost 10 times higher.
Yeah. I know you've done a lot of work on this at ATCO. With pure hydrogen, are there any significant safety issues with using in terms of the flame velocity?
In terms of flame velocity, I mean, the big thing is just, your nozzle has to be changed.
As long as that's changed, it's okay.
Yeah, and then I'd say the difference is a lot of appliances use a flame detector, which doesn't work with hydrogen. So like for natural gas, they're able to detect if you have a flame present in your appliance and then it shuts off if that flame isn't present. You have to use a different method of flame detection for hydrogen appliances. I'd say those are the two big things. We do have a couple of pure hydrogen appliances actually in one of our buildings, so we're heating one of our buildings with a pure hydrogen boiler. And I know the UK actually has a number of hydrogen penetration homes that have like stoves, fireplaces, so these products do exist, but yeah, they do have to Great question. Last thing we'll talk on here, higher heating value. Hydrogen from a volumetric perspective is about a third as dense when we're talking about energy. So that's just something we need to consider when we're talking about our pipelines. Kind of like he was asking, will hydrogen be safe? Again, we do just have to consider all those different properties, but we have to treat it with respect similar to natural gas. So we switched over from town gas to natural gas a number of decades ago and made adjustments to our systems to accommodate that. And sort of similar, we just have to understand how it reacts in our homes and what sort of safety precautions we need to take. One sort of highlight for hydrogen is a safer gas is about 95% of the risk personally within your home, if you have a natural gas fired appliance, comes from carbon monoxide poisoning. So that's 95% of your chance of being injured or death is coming from CO. And with hydrogen, obviously, you don't have that carbon in there, so you can't have carbon monoxide being formed. So there is some studies that show that it could be safer in residential applications, obviously, given the correct safety protocols.
So when you breathe pure hydrogen, there's nothing that happens?
Yeah, there wouldn't be any like toxic effect. I guess the one benefit is you kind of like helium, right, where it would rise out of your lungs very quickly. But obviously, you probably don't want to breathe it. It is fairly easy
You
to
would
ignite.
hear it on your voice, right?
Yeah, probably. I wouldn't recommend using it as a replacement. Again, because it is not like helium that it can ignite, but definitely not a fun part of it. Yeah. In terms of like toxicity, it's so just talking about hydrogen production, there's sort of three main types of hydrogen you guys might have heard about, like blue hydrogen, gray hydrogen, green hydrogen. So I'll talk about those. Those are kind of the main three. There is kind of like a whole spectrum. So there's turquoise, clear, gold, and these are all just different technologies. But I'll focus on the main three and then talk about why those colors are kind of being phased out. So blue and gray rely on sort of similar technologies, either steam methane reforming or autothermal reforming, which operate on fairly similar principles. They take steam, natural gas, they smash them together, it breaks apart bonds, which form carbon dioxide hydrogen, they insert more steam, which makes hydrogen and carbon dioxide. For blue hydrogen, the main principle is that once you've extracted the hydrogen from the CO2 hydrogen mixture, you're capturing that CO2 and you're either utilizing it in another product or you're storing it in other. For gray hydrogen, which is how about 95% of hydrogen in the world is treated now, you're just shooting that CO2 in the atmosphere. So in terms of carbon footprint, it's worse than burning methane because you obviously have all these different processes where you have to use energy to create steam. There's pressure involved, so you're just losing energy and increasing more carbon. Green hydrogen might be one you guys have heard of as well. Essentially, the principle behind this is you have an electrolyzer, which is just a fancy way of inserting electric charge into water and splitting apart the hydrogen and oxygen using a catalyst. The benefits here are that you're producing zero emissions on site. So, as long as your electricity is coming from green sources like solar, wind, hydro, there's no carbon involved outside of the construction of these plants. The downside is that they are fairly expensive. There's a lot of purification that has to go into the water as well. You can't put ionized water into most of these processes because it can damage the catalyst. And again, it's just really important to realize where the electricity is coming from, and I think that's why the color schemes are being sort of phased out. Because you could say, I have an electrolyzer on my site, I'm producing green hydrogen, I'm good for the planet. But especially in Alberta, if we have an electrolyzer on our site, 60 to 80% of our electricity comes from fossil fuels. So, we could say we're producing green hydrogen, but we're really not. So what really matters when we're looking at all these different technologies is carbon intensity, because that's what we care about. Ultimately, we're not painting hydrogen molecules different colors to denote the greenness of them. What really matters is how much carbon. And this slide just shows sort of what those numbers look like. This is that gray hydrogen is worse than burning methane typically on a per energy basis. I think methane would be about 50, 55 on here, kilograms of CO2 equivalent per gigajoule. You do see some of those blue hydrogen methods being closer to 20 or 10. Some of the better ATR and SMRs are comparable to solar. You don't see the plant construction carbon costs on these blue or gray hydrogen, largely because they play such a small role in the overall carbon produced. And obviously for the green hydrogen, you don't have a operating carbon cost, which you see your construction costs.
So SMR is the small modular reactor, or what?
No, it's steam methane.
Steam methane. So that has almost the same as solar. So from solar, where is the carbon footprint coming from? Is it the production?
All from the initial fabrication of the solar panel. So sorry, I guess I should have said this is like a life cycle emissions.
Yeah.
So this includes that fabrication, construction, deconstruction, recycling, all that kind of stuff.
So that also means solar is much worse than wind. Wind seems to be the best renewable. Oh. And that's despite the magnet and everything that is inside, right?
Yeah.
So because the others have worse production. Okay.
Yeah, I think because solar, cobalt mining, and all the different processes that go into that.
Solar, is it cobalt? I don't think. It's
well, that'd be batteries, sorry. But,
no, it's like silicon. Yeah, I don't know. Yeah.
Anyways, apparently there's a source here. I haven't personally read it, but
interesting.
I trust that it's somewhat right. So the whys of hydrogen. Does anybody else have any questions before I move on? Great. The whys of hydrogen. Victor kind of talked about this a little bit. Obviously, our federal government and the world as a whole is looking to decarbonize. So on the left, you can kind of see what Canada's overall energy system looks like. If you're from BC or you're from Ontario, your system would look a lot more favorable than this because you'll have a lot more hydro, a lot more nuclear. Alberta probably looks a lot worse than this, which I'm not proud to say. But either way, Canada as a whole has coal, we have gasoline, natural gas, all these things, and then the growing share of hydro, nuclear, all those sort of clean energies. What we see moving forward is, obviously those are very cheap forms of energy, and we're building more and more of them. But there is sort of a need, especially in our climates, to have an alternative fuel. And we do have the benefit for hydrogen of using our existing pipelines You can convert back and forth between these different forms of energy. So there's electrolyzers, hydrogen and electricity when say you have high solar production but low electric demand, and then fuel cells to turn hydrogen into electricity. On the other side of things, there are always, I think, the need for biofuels. I think Victor was talking a little about this, where for aviation, for example, it's not really a good way to electrolyze a lot of these industries. And same thing with hydrogen. There's a lot of industries that are kind of resistant to electrification, but maybe don't fuels as well.
So would the main function of hydrogen in the future be the transport or the energy storage?
That's a good question. I think it depends. So I think if batteries get a whole lot better, I think we'll probably see a lot of large-scale utility, like electric vehicle batteries. I think there's an available option of, maybe including hydrogen in that mix as well. I think it's also jurisdictionally dependent. So I think we'll see either way, medium to heavy transport being more hydrogen than electric. I think for our jurisdiction specifically, we'll see a lot of heating and heavy industry.
And maybe steel making, right?
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
So that would be a really good use for hydrogen as well, because a lot of the real processes aren't favorable.
Or maybe all metal.
Yeah, exactly. Like heavy industry might prefer that fuel instead of electricity. So, as far as the gas system goes, so this is sort of looking at what ATCO can focus on, because obviously we're not in heavy industry, we're not really producers of clean electricity either. We're just a transportation distribution company as far as utility goes. So there's a couple ways that we're looking at this net zero puzzle and figuring out what fits. So part of that will be coming from end user contributions. So that's things like the Canada Greener Home Grant, where people are improving the efficiency of their homes. Obviously, new homes are built to higher standards. You're getting more efficient appliances. You're getting heat pumps, district energy systems. There's also sort of other continuous improvement methods. So we're going to see improvements in technology. Maybe our systems get more efficient. There's a role carbon credits play in that for carbon capture in certain systems. So we do see a large part of this coming from clean fuels. I know British Columbia does a lot of renewable natural gas, or they purchase a lot of new renewable natural gas. So that'll probably be a part of our system in the future as well, but we do see hydrogen being sort of the key proponent for this as we're trying to decarbonize the gas system, which is largely for heating industry. And then one thing I think is important to note as far as ATCO is concerned, we're both an electric company and a gas company. So what we like to say is really that it's important to use the appropriate fuel for the appropriate use case. I don't think anybody's going to ask you to power your TV with hydrogen anytime in the future. We're not going away from LEDs. I think those are kind of what we're going to be stuck with for a while, because they're very good at what they do from an efficiency perspective. Same thing with passenger vehicles. The electric vehicles have kind of taken over the market and probably are the best use case. So electricity makes a lot of sense for that. But for heating your home, for appliances, like I said, heavy duty transport, there's a lot of cases where our gas distribution network makes a lot of sense. And you can kind of see the difference in the commodity costs here. So electricity, this is Alberta, so I don't know how this looks in BC or Ontario, wherever you guys are from, but it's about 5 times as expensive per kilowatt hour equivalent for electricity as it is for gas. And obviously that number changes a little bit with hydrogen, but again, just important to note that we're trying to find the appropriate use case for the appropriate fuel for it. Infrastructure. So this is a really big piece of this puzzle as well. A lot of people will say, hey, we know solar is good, we know wind is good. Why don't we just electrify everything? And this is a prime example of why, at least in Alberta, that doesn't really make a lot of sense. So this graph is just showing our peak usage on each system. So ATCO and NGTL are the two pipeline companies in Alberta that deliver 99% of natural gas. And so our peak loads were delivering about 105-ish gigawatt hours. On the other hand, the electric system delivers about 12 to 15 at peak. So if we try to shift all of the heating load over into the electric system, the current infrastructure just isn't built for it. There's also a lot of issues with where that generation comes from. So it's easy to say, hey, we're all electric, but again, in the winter especially, we're looking at about 5% of electricity coming from solar, wind, hydro in Alberta. We really don't have a lot of hydro, to beat this point to death, but there's also a bit of a cost differential when we're talking about transporting energy between pipes and wires. So for reference, there's a couple of high voltage AC and DC projects that have been completed in the last number of years. So those projects typically carry about 19 to 25 gigawatt hours per day at a cost of between 1.4 and 1.7 billion dollars. So on a unit cost, we're looking at trying to align the metrics for comparing gas pipelines and power lines that should be dollars per gigawatt hour carried per kilometer. We're looking at about $140,000, $200,000 per gigawatt hour per kilometer. When you compare that to something like Coastal Gas Link, which can transport close to 1,500 gigawatt hours per day, a lot larger than each of those electricity projects. You're looking at closer to $6,000 to $15,000 per equivalent energy unit. So there really is a large difference when we're talking about transporting energy between those two methodologies. And it's important that we're trying to pick the method that makes the most sense, especially when it's not a private company who's paying for this; it's people who use the gas system. And then on a commodity cost perspective, I already sort of touched on this. This slide sort of just tries to highlight the trends that we're seeing. So natural gas currently is that yellow line that's moving upwards towards the right. Victor talked a little bit about carbon tax, and that's really what's influencing this. This doesn't consider any fluctuations in the market based on demand, because those are kind of all over the place. We do see that moving up to the right. Electric prices in Alberta, at least, tend to follow that trend as well, because, as I said, about 60 to 80% of that comes from natural gas on average. And then hydrogen is more expensive currently than natural gas. You can see it's about 2 to 3 times more expensive, or was in 2021. But again, that was being produced at sort of low scale, lots of pilot projects. And it's a fairly new technology for a lot of these things. We haven't produced a lot of it at scale. So once we get to the economies of scale, we seem to see that line trending downward. And we expect we'll see price parity sort of close to 2030. So it sort of makes sense to start moving that direction with the policy that we're on. And just to sort of show off how terrible Alberta's electric grid is in terms of its green electricity production and sort of what it's projecting. So you saw in the past we had a lot of coal generation. That's those black lines. And then the blue lines is all natural gas production. So we've largely supplemented the loss of coal electric production with natural gas. There has been an increase in the number of wind projects, solar projects. We've had some policy changes which have sort of slowed those down in the last year. But these projections from, I'm actually not sure, AESO or IPPC are showing that we're really expecting that a lot of our growth in electric demand continuing to come from natural gas. So this is really showing that the pace that policy has set forward for electric projects or green electric projects isn't fast enough to significantly reduce the carbon intensity of the grid. So again, if we go full electric, this is going to continue being a problem in Alberta, which, I mean, jurisdictionally may not matter to all of you, but just sort of driving home the point that these hydrogen versus electrification projects really do matter to the jurisdiction. This is a bit of an example of where a lot of those renewable sources fail. And obviously, this is just a snippet. This isn't the case 90% of the time, but there are cases, obviously, where we see our solar and wind capacity factors that close to 10%, 15% when it's cold. So the blue lines are the demand during the day for electricity, and that's current demand. So if we switched over heating loads to electric, obviously those demands would rise. But just because of the low amount of sunlight hours, low incidence angle, and as well, like the wind just tends to blow less in the winter as well. You do tend to see a bit of a mismatch between production and the demand for the system. So good to keep in mind. It's great to install all these different solar and wind projects, but we have to make sure that we have energy when we take care of them. Oh man, there's a lot of cost slides on here. I apologize. This should be the last one, I hope. This is just a study that was done in Alberta basically showing what the cost would be to go for hydrogen heating versus electrification. And the study doesn't take into account, if there's a increased prevalence for electric cars or anything like that, which would just be switching over the heating grid or heating to one of these two technologies. And what we found is that the electric capital cost would be much higher, again, just because the current system just isn't built for those loads, whereas our pipeline systems in the ground are largely suitable for hydrogen, especially when we're talking about distribution. Both of these obviously have a customer cost. For electric, either you're switching your furnace over to like a heat pump or something comparable. For hydrogen, you need to swap over as well. And what we found as well, and again, this is largely because Alberta's electric generation grid is so poor from an emissions perspective. The emission savings with hydrogen are about 10 times lower at a lower cost. So in Alberta, it makes a lot of sense to heat our homes and businesses with. I do feel that this presentation is very Alberta focused. This does have some implications for Canada, but Alberta has a huge advantage when it comes to hydrogen, which does maybe benefit the rest of Canada as well. We have a lot of natural gas, so we're looking at SMR, ATR as methodologies of production. We're able to produce that hydrogen at a very low cost. We also have carbon capture assets. There's an ability, large geological formations that we're able to store carbon back into the ground in. We have a lot of pipeline experience, and there's a large industrial demand for this kind of stuff. So that balances out that supply and demand conversation. We obviously need a place to dump hydrogen, use hydrogen, I should say, if we want suppliers to come on the grid that are low carbon.
So when I talked to ArcelorMittal, they said, yeah, we are looking at making steel, but we don't have the infrastructure in Canada to have the amount of hydrogen we need. So when could they switch?
Ooh, that's a good question. I think it depends. So it's really policy driven. There are hydrogen pipelines in Alberta. There's a big one that runs from Fort Saskatchewan through, I think, Edmonton. I'm not sure certain of that.
But it would need to be a federal policy, right? Because it's over several provinces.
Yeah, I mean, it depends. From a utility perspective, there has to be policy that changes how the utility makes money. So right now, all of ATCO's hydrogen projects are paid for by ATCO, because the way the regulated infrastructure works, and this is probably going a little bit too deep into the boring side of the utility, but essentially the utility is only allowed to make money on natural gas, not on hydrogen. So if we want to transport hydrogen to customers, that has to change. In terms of the generation versus transportation privately, I couldn't tell you exactly what needs to change. I think, there has to be obviously demand for it, and then somebody has to build those projects. So I know there's a bunch of projects that are in the works between sort of the heartlands in Alberta, so close to Fort Saskatchewan, but I couldn't. Sorry, you had a question?
How much hydrogen, what portion of hydrogen can be located in the natural gas transport?
Like blending hydrogen?
Yeah.
So it depends. Depends on what your use case is. So what we've found is if you're planning to use it just in the grid as a whole, for homes it's about 20% is the maximum. So above that, you start to have issues where the appliances don't function normally. The issue would be with larger like industrial customers, because a lot of their equipment is a lot less fuel agnostic. They're very, very dialed into your natural gas. So there's a lot of work that needs to be done to see, what would the limits be for like an electric generation plant? Is that a use case we even want to dive into? So the answer is largely what we're looking at ATCO is blending into the distribution grid, so we wouldn't have to worry as much about those large industrial customers. But yeah, the limit would essentially be 20%. So we're not blending a ton of hydrogen into natural gas currently. We have one pilot project. Like you're asking, like most of the hydrogen being generated is from natural fossil fuels, right?
Like methane pyrolysis,
Mm-hmm.
direct methane pyrolysis, or amount of electricity that we store to create hydrogen, and then we store those hydrogen as the energy storage, and we use this hydrogen whenever we need energy.
Yeah, totally, and that's definitely an option. I think what it comes down to is first like carbon pricing, and then the economics of production on either side. So, like Alberta, it's cheaper to make hydrogen using natural gas and then storing that carbon dioxide underground, so sequestering that carbon. But there are lots of jurisdictions where it makes a lot more sense to use solar, wind, all that kind of stuff. So like California would be a good example because they have a ton of excess solar during the day. So maybe you could use that as a storage medium. So yeah, to your point.
But
The energy, electricity that's generated from solar and wind, total amount is less than the needed amount. Maybe that's why we're not.
But like in Germany, 20 years ago, solar and wind was less than 1%. Now it is more than 100%. And the problem, it has caused political issues because Germany is today on average exporting more electricity than it's importing because it produces too much. There's one windy day or one solar day and it's too much, and so they are looking very much into hydrogen production to buffer it because they have excess electricity. Yeah, and this is why they have done a political statement to do all steel production by hydrogen. Yeah, and they also replace all gas power plants with hydrogen. Yeah, so it can be done, but it took about 20 years in Germany, and 20 years ago nobody believed this. Yeah.
Yeah. So all great points. Definitely, I agree with those. There's still cost on here. I apologize. Anyways, as a quick summary, hopefully, before we go into sort of the ATCO project stuff, just comparing natural gas, electrification, hydrogen, you can see from a cost perspective, in the absence of the carbon tax, natural gas is going to continue to be the cheapest of these three technologies until there's some new way to generate hydrogen cheaper. The benefit is natural gas and hydrogen are both able to use that existing infrastructure. So as I said, our pipelines really don't have to change too much, especially the low pressure ones. For electrification, we will have to do pretty significant upgrades. From a reliability perspective, natural gas and hydrogen sort of have a benefit of their transportation system also being a battery. So when there's low demand in the system, we're able to pressurize those systems up to their maximum operating pressure. And then if everybody gets home, turns on their hot showers, increase their thermostat, you can draw sort of that pressure down. So you're not fully relying on your producers to match demand. You do have that battery sort of built into your system. I've personally never seen the natural gas grid go down.
So the use case or the business case for hydrogen in Alberta is mainly not that you can get free electricity, but that you can produce it without needing to pay carbon tax, right? So it's basically the carbon tax that makes the difference.
That's right, yeah. So like on your natural gas bill, I know in December I paid like $60 carbon tax. So that would be the thing where we're trying to make it more affordable for us. Carbon intensity, natural gas and electrification in Alberta are very similar because either basically burning natural gas largely. As long as you're capturing the carbon, the hydrogen will be the lowest. And then from a safety perspective, electrification is good. You do still have obviously some concerns with fires and all that kind of stuff. Natural gas is, I'd say, typically better than electrification, but you still have that carbon monoxide risk, and then hydrogen has been found to be better because it eliminates a large portion of those. And then, before we move on, just to note that we're not the only ones doing these projects. Hydrogen blended projects have existed for a number of years. Europe is very far ahead of us on this. They've been doing this for probably about a decade. Hawaii Gas actually has had about 15% hydrogen in their pipes for over 40 years, largely because they're still using town gas. So it's sort of a they're not injecting hydrogen, it's just in their grid, but they're using the same appliances that we use. So I guess the key takeaway here is ATCO is at a really good opportunity to leverage a lot of the learnings from these projects sort of globally as we created the largest planning project in dive into the Fort Saskatchewan blending project as well as some of our pure hydrogen projects as well, and some of the work we have ongoing in the future. How are we doing for time? Do I have till 4:15?
Yes.
Perfect.
Yeah.
We got lots of time. Actually, does anybody have questions before we move on? If not, we can save until the end. I just don't want anybody to feel like they'll forget their questions. Great. So the Fort Saskatchewan Hydrogen Blending Project, for those of you who aren't sort of familiar with the Edmonton area, Fort Saskatchewan is about 15 minutes northeast of Edmonton. It's a fairly industrial community. There's a lot of different oil and gas plants up there. But essentially what we've done is we've taken a section of the existing natural gas distribution grid and we've separated it from the rest in Fort Saskatchewan. So it's about 2,100 customers on this one section of distribution grid who are receiving a natural gas hydrogen blend from a single source. These are mostly residential homes, some small businesses as well as a school. In fall of 2022, we started delivering a 5% hydrogen blend to these customers. So they were the first in, I think, North America to receive a hydrogen blend to their homes, certainly in Alberta. And we do plan to bring this up to 20%. So really the intent of this is a pilot project. So, this project on itself isn't saving emissions. We're using an electrolyzer, but it's with grid electricity. So really what we're trying to do is demonstrate to the public, the government, to regulators that, hey, this is a viable way of reducing emissions, assuming we get the hydrogen from the correct places, and it's safe, and we can do it efficiently.
And do they actually pay less carbon tax now?
Not yet. Again, because we're producing it with methods that are carbon intensive, and there isn't really a regulatory means set up yet to capture this change. So that's all part of that process, is being like, hey, this is a thing. Government, please change these rules so that customers are incentivized to want this. Great question. This is a sort of boring slide, but essentially behind any of these big changes, there's there's a lot of changes to a big company. So we have a fairly large organizational change management system that went behind this. So that was a large portion of my job. It's essentially looking at our 3 Ps, we call them. So our pipe, people, processes. The pipes are what we put in the ground. You have to look at do we install the same materials that we used to? Does that have to change? Do our regulators change? Anything like that. For the people, have our people receive the correct training? Does anything change? Does they need different equipment? And then processes would be, what are their procedures? Do they have to dig differently around these lines? Do they have to locate them differently? Anything like that. And then we also have a fairly large customer as well. And I'll talk about that. Technical challenges. So for those of you who, again, aren't familiar with ATCO, ATCO is a utility company. We do pipeline work. We're not a research organization by any means. We don't do the work that you guys do. I'm mostly just a project manager who has an engineering background. But so there was a lot of technical challenges that went into this project and needed a lot of people to work with, people like yourselves. So we partnered with a number of organizations. So we did some gas stratification work with the University of Calgary. So essentially, like, once you mix that hydrogen together, we're checking to see, does it stay together when it's in the pipes or does it separate? Because there are different densities. Fines testing was a big part of it, and I'll dive into that as well. Risk assessment, material impact testing. So there's a lot of different organizations we work with. Somewhere in Alberta, DNV is based in the Netherlands, so this is kind of like a global effort for our appliance testing program. Like I said, was probably one of the bigger efforts we did with a third party, and that was with DNV out of the Netherlands. Essentially, what we looked at what we expected for appliances in customers' homes within this specific area, and we tested 13 common appliances through 3 scenarios. So essentially, steady state, when it's operating normally, fast or abrupt changes in hydrogen. So maybe you start with 20% and then it drops to 10% or 5% and then goes back up. How does the appliance react? And then cold starting with maybe a higher percentage of hydrogen than we have on operation. So, and when we did this, we measured a number of different variables. So, looking at emissions, is there flashback that examines the burner points, the burner deck temperature. So, are you going to see a change in how long it takes to cook things? structure of the flame. I've already talked about when I was doing a question there, the flame detection systems. Do those continue to operate? So that all kind of went into this. It was a fairly robust testing program. And really what we found, and I kind of gave some spoilers to this earlier, is that below 20%, so that 5 to 20% range that ATCO is planning on blending in, everything continues to operate fine. There's no damage to the appliances. There does have to be a little bit more long-term testing to make sure there isn't some effects that we didn't see when we did this testing, but that's work that we're still working on. I think it's possible to get up to say 25, 30% as long as we're proving out those long-term impacts. There are some appliances that are a lot less sensitive to hydrogen, so we got some fireplaces up to 40% before we saw some of these effects. Again, what we're trying to do with this is insert the most amount of hydrogen as we can into the grid to decarbonize as much as possible without asking customers like, hey, replace your fireplace, replace your furnace, because at that point, it kind of becomes a bit of an issue, and you may as well just go to 100%. Why not fully decarbonize? And from this stemmed a joint industry project. So as I said, we're doing more work on this, and we've been lucky enough to get inputs from a number of different Canadian and a couple, I think one American utility. So they're all, investing in this project and testing a wider range of appliances. That way we can kind of have a more better, more complete picture of, all these different systems, not just this one area, how that will impact those. Make sure that we're not surprised when we introduce hydrogen into the grid and somebody has some obscure appliance we haven't heard of before. So trying to avoid that. As part of this project, we also did the material impact assessment. So we did our full review of the materials that are within ATCO's system as well as our customer system. So that's on our distribution system as well as in people's homes, and found that they were all suitable for hydrogen and natural gas blends. Similar materials have been used for decades in other jurisdictions. So as I said, that Hawaii gas project was really good learning for us, and that there hasn't been any significant impact. We do benefit a lot from the low pressures of our system. So on the distribution side, we typically operate at about 100 pounds, or 600 and some kVA, 690 kVA, and then obviously in the home it's about a quarter PSI. So you don't really see the concerns with hydrogen embrittlement that you would see in the transmission systems where your stresses are a lot higher. So this has been a positive takeaway for us, but still a good exercise to run through to make sure there's no surprises when we inject results. Leaks. So there's sort of a common thought. Hydrogen is obviously the smallest molecule. So a lot of people are under the assumption that because it's so much smaller, it's about 20% smaller than methane. They expect that if you have a system that's completely gas tight in methane, once you introduce hydrogen, there'll be leaks because of that smaller molecule. Really, what we've found for low pressure systems, where the driving force behind those leaks is a lot smaller, if the system is gas tight, it's also going to be hydrogen tight, just because the probabilities of having a leak path that's several angstroms smaller, is typically not enough to induce the leak. And if it was, if that leak path did exist, it's typically at a rate to be comparable to permeation.
Yeah.
So very, very small, and not really a significant impact. For higher pressure systems, this may be an issue, and it's something that's being investigated, but not a concern when we're talking about hydrogen for home, for example. Again, you do have that benefit of it being over 7 times lighter, so if there are small leaks, we'll typically just use fast enough that it doesn't collect and form those soluble mixtures, and just like natural gas, you're able to detect it. So you can odorize it, although there are some compatibility issues when it comes to fuel cells, so there's a lot of work being done on finding an odorant that's compatible with all those technologies. We also do have detection methods for hydrogen.
So natural gas would sink down?
Natural gas is still lighter than air. It just won't diffuse as fast.
Okay.
Yeah. So it's about, in terms of relative gravity, it's about half as dense as air, whereas hydrogen is about 7.
Yeah. And carbon monoxide is heavier, or?
Ooh, that's a good question.
Carbon dioxide is heavier. So
I think
that is
carbon
going.
monoxide might be heavier.
Carbon monoxide, I don't know.
I think it's heavier because your carbon monoxide detectors are usually on your base words.
Okay, yeah.
And I think it's heavier. That's
Yeah.
why.
Carbon dioxide is definitely heavier. There
Yeah,
were a
I
number
think
of
carbon
cases.
monoxide is
Yeah,
heavier as well.
okay.
Great question. Speaking of carbon monoxide, sort of timely question there. What we found is that carbon monoxide monitors actually have a cross sensitivity to hydrogen.
Oh.
So if you have a carbon monoxide detector in your home, you kind of do have a little bit of a benefit compared to natural gas in that, if you're asleep and you're not using your nose to smell odorant, your carbon monoxide detector might still go off. The downside is that they're typically deleterious to these sensors. So if your carbon monoxide detector goes off, it may not go off again. There's another leak, so you do typically have to replace them when they're impacted by hydrogen. But again, that's something I think is being investigated. I know we have personal monitors for our operators that are hydrogen hardened, so they don't. They might still go off if there's a hydrogen leak, but they don't get through. So that may be a technology that we can use in the future. Yeah, general hydrogen safety summary slide. So again, there's no impact to our existing natural gas appliances. That's a 20% blends. Our odorants continue to be effective. Virtually no impact to the distribution system capacity, so we're not going to do a ton of upgrades when we do go up to 20%. There are some minor upgrades required for pure hydrogen just because of that difference in energy density. We talked about leaks already. The materials are acceptable, and the total cumulative societal risk decreases between 4 to 14% with a 20% hydrogen blend, which I think is largely driven from that.
So is there really a pressure threshold where hydrogen embrittlement would not occur? Because it even can occur through corrosion, and that is a very low pressure.
Yeah, it's not really about it occurring or not occurring. It's just where it becomes relevant from an integrity perspective.
Okay.
So, like on our distribution steel pipelines, you'll still have a decrease in toughness, but because you're operating well below 30% of your SMITE, that decrease in toughness doesn't really change the materials. Because you're never
unless it is coupled to a corrosion process, right?
Sure.
Because hydrogen embrittlement could be part of, for example, stress corrosion cracking, and then you have an issue.
Yeah.
But
that
that
would be the same
yeah,
with our
yeah. But
typically.
hopefully in normal steel, it's not a problem.
Totally. Yeah. And really the big thing is for the transmission where you're getting those higher pressure, higher operating stresses.
Yeah, because then they also have this high strength steel, right? And that is bad because that is super susceptible.
Yeah, exactly. Whereas our distribution systems are typically low strength steel and they're operating, at 5 to 10%. So they're never in a region where they're worrying about hitting that toughness threshold. Education and engagement. So one of the big pieces that we did for this particular community, for the Fort Saskatchewan community, was hydrogen blending home inspection program. So we essentially delivered flyers to all the customers in this area's homes and offered for one of our service operators to come to their house, check their appliances, check their pipes for leaks. But really the main point of this program was to just give customers an opportunity to ask questions. So, the complimentary inspection of appliances and piping was kind of just to incentivize them to have a conversation if they had questions. We were able to get into about 85% of the homes within this area, so that's about 1,800 customers or just over 5,800 of them. We've also been involved in a number of industry projects, as well as developing courses for maintenance safe, which are kind of tech schools in Calgary and or trade schools, I should say, in Calgary and Edmonton. So developing hydrogen courses to educate the public on. Oh, I might have disconnected from Zoom actually. It says my internet connection is unstable. Am I still showing on there? Sorry, guys.
No, you're back.
I'm sharing now. Hopefully I haven't been gone for too long.
Yeah, but if so, I have you still captured in the video.
Well, at least they can hear me.
Yeah. That's good. Yeah, good.
And then, just to, obviously we did a lot of work up front to make sure all these systems are safe, but I think it's important that we do our due diligence after the fact once we have these systems operating. So part of our plans for these communities include validating all of the part of the design phase. So doing additional leak survey in these areas to validate the hydrogen isn't leaking more prevalently, sampling the gas downstream to make sure that we're not getting 30% hydrogen in one place, 5% hydrogen somewhere else, indicating that maybe the hydrogen and natural gas molecules are staying together. Meter verification, so making sure that we're checking the meters at your home before we introduce hydrogen, and then after it's been in service to make sure the accuracy doesn't change. All those things are kind of part of our plan.
Because the gases have different densities, so maybe they separate in some places, right?
Exactly.
Yeah.
So that was actually work that we did with the University of Calgary. This is a slide that would require you to kind of be in the weeds on a utility side, but essentially we started blending in October of 2022, blended for about a month, and then the Canadian Standards Association decided to issue a notice that said, hey, your appliances aren't good for hydrogen blends. So ATCO stopped blending, essentially to handle that problem of making sure that everybody had the right information. We didn't want our customers reaching out and going, hey, CSA said this, you said this, what's going on? So we stopped blending and worked with the Canadian Standards Association to provide them the testing data we had. And really what they found eventually is that the test gases that they already have for natural gas covers up to 5% hydrogen. So that ended up not being a problem. The issue moving forward is getting up to 20%. So we do want to make sure we're on the same page with CSA moving forward. Funny enough, we worked with the standards group in CSA, and we're pretty open communications-wise with them when we were working on this project. And just sort of assumed that would feed through the company. And what we found was that the verification and certification group had no idea what we were doing, so this was a surprise to them. So this is, I guess, the point being is this is why we do pilot projects.
So is ATCO part of the standard technical committee?
Sort of. CSA is a separate entity.
Yeah.
But like we participate in a lot of the work.
But maybe not that committee that was issuing the notice.
So I think we are now, but we weren't at the time.
Okay.
So yeah, we had been talking with CSA, but it's, I guess, just a bunch of different branches, and we weren't aware that there was one that was not aware of our project. So again, that's why we do pilot projects. We want to find these issues now instead of when we go large scale and trying to find all those stopping blocks. Like we were talking about the valley of death. Finding that early is really important. So we do hope that we can get up to 20% later this year, but we don't really have a clear path. Progressing hydrogen utilities. So I do have a couple of other projects that I'll talk about. These probably should have been moved up because now they've been commissioned or they're very close to commissioning. In any case, this is our Fort Saskatchewan site. So half of this site, the stuff on this side here, this is where all of the hydrogen blending takes place for that Fort Saskatchewan blending project. So we have a telemetry building here. This is actually the blending unit, electrolyzer, a hydrogen storage tank, and then that's just a natural gas aid station. So that's what provides that entire area of 100 customers. In the middle is our Fort Saskatchewan Operating Center. So this is a new building located on site here, and I'll talk about that more on the next slide. And then we also actually have a UBP project on this site, which is a methane pyrolysis project. So they've been in construction for a while. Basically attempting to demonstrate a novel form of creating hydrogen from methane. So instead of using SMR ATR, where you're creating hydrogen and CO2, these methods, or this particular method, creates hydrogen and then carbon black. So you're not having to worry about the logistics of capturing a gas or separating it from the hydrogen. And in the current market, carbon black is used for a lot of products. So not only
tattoo inks, for example.
Sorry?
Tattoo inks.
Ah, yeah, tattooing. Like rubber for tires,
Right.
asphalt, certain paints and dyes. So it's interesting being able to produce hydrogen as a commodity, but also a product that you can sell. And depending on the purity, it's fairly high value in things like graphene and all that. So, whether that continues to be the case, we produce a lot of it moving forward. Not my project. But it's a very cool project, and I hope to see it operate very soon. This is the operations center. So half the building serves as sort of a home for our service operators who work out of the area and are installing meters, checking on homes. The other half is a demonstration space. So this building is hooked up to not only natural gas, but also the hydrogen natural gas blend that comes from our station, as well as pure hydrogen. So we have 8 test or demonstration bays, I should say, here, where we're looking to demonstrate new appliances as they come out. So, if there's a new hydrogen furnace, we can demonstrate it to the public here. If there's, a barbecue or something like that, we can demonstrate this to the public and government in this space. And this building is actually heated 100% by hydrogen, as well as hot water from that. And that comes from this guy, which is a boiler hot water unit. So it creates either hot air and water or just hot water for space heating. So those are 2 different units. And this was created by Gradient Thermal out of Calgary. ATCO worked with them to design that. And D&D out of the Netherlands was also part of the program. So I guess just an example of an appliance. I know I think the next slide also has a number of other examples. So just I guess to kind of prove out that these things do exist. Largely they exist in Europe at this point. They're so much further ahead in terms of certifying all these things. So that furnace that I showed in the last slide, we had to get special approvals to use in our facility because there's no certification standard currently for pure hydrogen appliances. So we're approved to use it, but we couldn't just install it everywhere. We couldn't buy it off the shelf and install it in your home yet. But these things do exist in Europe. There's stoves, fireplaces, barbecues. We have one out, and we've cooked off of, which is kind of fun. But yeah, these things are becoming more and more prevalent. So it won't just be a switch over for just your furnace. Maybe we'll be able to continue to cook on hydrogen or on a gas or one of the other projects I like to talk on is the Bremner community. So I didn't realize that I had the banner back up. So ATCO received funding for doing a FEED study, so front-end engineering and design, for a pure hydrogen community. So Bremner is north of Sherwood Park, which is east of Edmonton. So part of this funding includes a demonstration home. So we've actually already built that demonstration home. It's what's pictured there. And hopefully in early July, we'll be turning this on, and it'll be heated and hot water running from pure hydrogen. So just essentially to demonstrate that this is safe, it can be done in your home. And then moving on, we'll be doing our engineering and design stage for the community. We'll be sort of designing a whole community's worth of these houses. We're starting to build homes in late 2025, early 2026. The first stage will be about 150 homes, but the ultimate goal of this community will be about 85,000 residents. So close to 20 to 25,000 that could be running hydrogen. So if nothing else happens in the world, if everywhere else stands still, this will be the biggest hydrogen project in the world. But I wouldn't. Again, the purpose of this is, like we talked about, just to minimize that financial burden. I won't spend too much time on this. We have a Pioneer project as well, where we're looking into an existing pipeline that we bought from a different transportation company, and basically just doing a study to see, can we reuse this pipeline in pure hydrogen service? What implications does that have on other pipelines that we want to, convert from natural gas to hydrogen? Because obviously, maybe it doesn't make economic sense to replace every pipeline we have in the province that runs natural gas to hydrogen. We want to be able to reuse a lot of these assets. So that's what this study is all about, is figuring out what that looks like. On a larger scale, we also did a convention last year. I don't know if any of you have heard about the Canadian Hydrogen Convention. It runs out of Edmonton every year. Last year we ran the whole convention center on a 20% hydrogen blend. So, I guess we've already talked about appliance compatibility and stuff, but this one I wanted to show off because those boilers are giant. They're not just, your average in-home furnace that fits in a little mechanical room. They're these, multi-million-dollar devices, and they're sort of proving out that, it's not just those special-made or residential appliances that will work. Ongoing research. So there's still a lot of work for us to do, and we're still working with a number of organizations on this. We're part of a large number of technical committees. So I sit on the Pipeline Center that 662 on the Hydrogen Task Force. I know we have a number of people on the technical subcommittee, essentially working to build out the standards required for all this work to happen. We're doing a bunch of different testing with a number of different organizations. So permeation testing, so seeing at what rate hydrogen permeates through the pipe walls for different polyethylene materials. Checking to see if our electrofusions are impacted at all. So when you're fusing two different polyethylene pipes together, that's called electrofusion. Making sure that those aren't impacted. Stratification testing, which I already talked about. We did our first phase of POC and are moving on to the second phase right away here, as well as some long-term material impact testing for polyethylene and steels. So, maybe corrosion comes into that, maybe not. But
So is hydrogen permeating more through polyethylene or more to steel? Polyethylene.
Yeah. Steel is just much more dense. So
Yeah.
Definitely more. I only have a couple more slides here, so we might get out a little bit early or have a bunch of time for questions. In case anybody's getting bored. Only got more to bear through here. So past net zero, so we've done a number of these things already. We've done our hydrogen blend demonstrations. We're working on, or we've worked on pure appliance development, pure hydrogen appliance development, as well as our community hydrogen blending project in Saskatchewan. Moving forward, we want to have a number of hydrogen communities, so running on 20% or 100% hydrogen. For Alberta, likely we'll end up having some hydrogen pipelines, whether that's just between Edmonton or Calgary, between Calgary and Banff, kind of spreading the availability there, and then further beyond widespread blending, our communities to get to that net zero goal. Just as something that's a little bit more real, I guess. There's sort of a hydrogen hub in Alberta. So this is the Alberta government's methodology of creating a pathway for hydrogen and figuring out what the interest is, what that actually looks like. So this is just a map over Edmonton showing all of the interested parties that are saying, hey, we want hydrogen or hydrogen blends. I think these are largely hydrogen projects. So there's a number of residential buildings that want it. There's a number of transit garages that are looking for hydrogen blends. That truck on the right-hand side there, or if your left, is a Hyzon truck, which is a pure hydrogen truck, I believe. So it runs a fuel cell hydrogen there to operate. So there is plans to build a pipeline and serve a lot of these customers. So it's not just a sort of a pipe dream. That truck exists. Yeah, so we've driven them around.
I'm from Edmonton, and I heard there's a bus or a truck that has hydrogen as a fuel cell.
Yeah, I think there's hydrogen buses as well.
I'm not sure if they're already in use.
Yeah, that's a good question. I don't think they're in use yet. I think they still are looking for like a refueling station.
Yeah.
I think Strathcona County is planning on having some hydrogen buses. So,
as far as I know, right now in Canada, there's not even one hydrogen bus or hydrogen car that is being used. So I guess this is still.
yeah, I think there's a lot of work to do on the infrastructure side, like especially for passenger vehicles. Where do you fill them? What they cost? But they are coming for sure. The technology to run the buses definitely exists. It's more like where do you get them? Great question. What's next? So for us, we've done the pilot project. We're still working on sort of spreading the word of why is this a good option for Canadians, and then really comes down to changes in regulations. But yeah, really just pushing this is a safe alternative. Abundant, it could be an abundant low carbon hydrogen supply or energy supply. It's reliable. It will be cost effective, and again, lower emissions than what we currently have, especially for with that, I will free you. If you have any questions, obviously now is a good time. But if not, there is a QR code up there that I